you'll find that the returns are probably not as good as commercial. So commercial inherently have probably 2 to 3 times higher profits or returns than residential.
William Tong, thanks for joining us, mate. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being on Property Soup. It's your first time with us podcasting.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for having me. It's pretty exciting.
Pleasure to have you, man.
Yeah, we've done countless Zoom meetings together, helping clients, but this is it's good to do this in person and have you on the show, man.
Yeah, I'd love to be here.
Yeah. Cool. So, let's just get straight into it, man. Tell us, you're a commercial buyer's agent. We actually know each other pretty well.
Yes.
We've worked on a lot of deals together, helped a lot of clients together, actually.
Yep.
But tell the audience, a bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you get into commercial property, and how did you get into becoming a buyer's agent for commercial?
Okay. Well, I guess the short version is I've been in the industry for over 22 years. I started when I was 21, and so I'm showing my age at the moment. And my first real estate job was actually selling off-the-plan apartments in Sydney CBD. This is back in 2001, which is right after the Sydney Olympics. So the property market was actually going for a bit of a boom at that stage. And as a young guy just straight out of uni, I was doing 2 or 3, off-the-plan sales a month. So I was actually really, really happy. So I did that for about 1.5 years, and then I kind of got bored of residential because it's always the same, and I wanted something a bit more challenging, and I wanted something that's a little bit more, I suppose, had a better career path. And so I got a bit of a tap on the shoulder from a recruiter in 2003 to join LJ Hooker Commercial. So that's my first commercial property gig, and so I've been in commercial property since. So just a little bit over 20 years officially in commercial, but obviously over 22 years in real estate overall. And stayed at LJ Hooker for about 3 or 4 years, and then made a bit of a name for myself. But LJ Hooker at commercial at that point in time was still probably a Tier 2 sort of agency. Wasn't really the Tier 1 agencies like CBRE and so forth. So I started getting noticed, and so the Colliers actually reached out to me and recruited me over to join them. So I stayed with Colliers for about 4 years, and then I got recruited by CBRE. Stayed with CBRE for about 1 year, and then joined Jones Lang LaSalle, heading up their metropolitan department. So stayed there for about 3.5 years, and then got recruited to Cushman & Wakefield. The list goes on, and stayed there with Cushies for about 5 months only because I didn't know at that point in time, but when I joined Cushman & Wakefield, they just got bought out by DTZ. So merger and acquisition, so a lot of people left, so I left as well, and then I rejoined LJ Hooker Commercial in 2016, and then by that stage, LJ Hooker Commercial was definitely one of the top tier agencies in Australia. So I stayed with them for about 4 years, and then I got a bit sick of the corporate, I suppose, life and working for someone else. So I decided to start Property Lions back in 2020. So it's been 3 years now, and it's been a really good journey. I love what I'm doing, and as part of the transition into Property Lions, I decided to go down the property buyers agency side of things because I spent all my career on the seller side. Whereas I felt that I can offer a lot more than the typical selling agents, and I can actually offer a lot more as a property strategist, but in particular the commercial side of things. And so that's been really, really good. So, we're doing multi-million-dollar acquisitions for commercial property investors, high net worth investors, and we're focusing on the Eastern Seaboard, so Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. So yeah, that's kind of a quick sort of summary of my background and how I got started.
Well, we'll get into a little bit about commercial property strategies and kind of deals and stuff that you've done. But tell us, having that extensive, 22 years in the industry, that's a long time. Tell us kind of a bit about what you've learned being in commercial. You've got a real insight into how to scale with commercial and how to turn $1 million into $2 million and $2 million into $4 million. Like, tell us a little bit more about what you've seen and what you learned.
Yeah, I'd love to share. Well, I guess, people always think that commercial and residential are so different. Well, the matter is it's not. I mean, fundamentally it's the same thing. They're both investment vehicles. You're buying land, you've got a building, and you're leasing it out to a tenant. The only difference is with residential, you're leasing it out to a resident, whereas with commercial, you're leasing it out to business. And obviously with commercial, it's a little bit more complicated because you've got different sectors as well. So you've got your industrial properties, your commercial property, retail properties, and pubs and hotels, and there's a few other ones as well. But the fundamentals are the same. So if you understand the fundamentals of investing, the fundamentals of economics, the fundamentals of market research and market dynamics, you can still do really well in commercial. I guess the biggest difference is the risk. And, with residential, there's nothing wrong with residential. I own residential properties and I've got a lot of residential clients as well. The residential is much safer, much more predictable. And everybody understands residential because everybody lives in a house or an apartment, lives somewhere. And because it is safer, it's more predictable, you'll find that the returns are probably not as good as commercial. So commercial inherently have probably 2 to 3 times higher profits or returns than residential, but it also has the same risk factor.
Just a quick pause there. Do you mean from a capital growth or from a cash flow perspective?
A bit of both. So the way I look at investment is I don't distinguish between capital growth and rental returns. I look at it collectively. So, I always look at it, let's say a 10-year horizon. Like what are you going to get in 10 years if I invested in residential house versus I invested in commercial property? Over that 10-year horizon, you could expect that commercial property is going to do 2 to 3 times more than residential, all things considered.
So if we just considered a pooled gross return.
Yeah. So basically, so if I spend the same amount of money buying resi, buying a commercial, and I sold it in 10 years, I will be sitting on 2 to 3 times more profit than I would in residential.
Done correctly.
Done correctly, of course. And I think that's what I was alluding to was the risk factor as well. So commercial property, the biggest thing about commercial property is risk factor, and it's not for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a minute. Okay. Kind of when people kind of discuss when you think people are ready to get into commercial, if maybe they've been investing in resi for a while. But before we get into that, walk us through, because, I'm having this discussion all the time. Buyer's agents are very common in the US. It's 1-to-1 for selling agents. And buyer's agents it's quite a new concept in Australia. People kind of think, well, why do I need someone to help me buy property? So walk us through what you do as a commercial buyer's agent. Walk us through the process that you take your clients through and how that actually benefits them. Yeah,
really good question. If people actually spend the time and really understand what a buyer's agent does, whether it's residential or commercial, they'll see a lot of value in it. So, like you said, Allan, buyer's agency is a very new concept in Australia, even though it's been around for a while, but, it's still relatively new to most investors. I guess, you look at the 3 main things that each investor needs or has a lack of is usually time, the personal time. I mean, if you wanted to actually do investing properly, you have to put in the time. There's not something that you can just watch a couple of YouTube videos or listen to a couple of podcasts.
It's a great starting point, but it's not the end point.
No, that's right. That's right. You really need to put in the hours. A lot of people don't. You've got families, you've got businesses, you've got work. So a lot of people don't have the time. Number 2 is a lot of people don't have the access to opportunities. So a lot of people get overwhelmed. So you log on to domain.com or realestate.com and you get hit with hundreds of thousands of listings. Like, how do you know what's going to suit you, right? Unless you spend the hours working it out. And the other thing also is with commercial properties, which is more common than residential, is that there's a lot more off-market opportunities in commercial. So broadly speaking, probably 60%, of commercial properties are done off-market. which is really surprising to a lot of residential investors, whereas, residential more probably like 80% on market. So a buyer's agent with a good network, with good history of, doing deals would have access to off-market opportunities, which the normal sort of investor wouldn't have. And then the final thing is it's the research analysis and the negotiation, which is a key part of it. And again, you need time to invest in research. You need time to invest in analysis. And also you need specific skills, particularly in commercial property, to negotiate a good deal. Because with commercial properties, it's not just the price, it's the terms, it's the settlement, it's the deposit, it's the early access, it's the subject to funding, is it options, like it's a lot more dynamic. So these three things are probably the core three things that each commercial property investor either needs or lacks, which is time, access to good opportunities, and having the ability, the resources to do the proper research analysis and negotiations.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Just touching on that, talking about time, something that I've learned recently, people think that knowledge is that you just read something, you have the knowledge. That's not how it works. It's kind of, how do I put this? Let's say you wanted to learn, I don't know, jiu-jitsu or something, right? You can watch plenty of videos, you can read all the books, but doesn't mean you can just jump in and take on an expert. You've actually got to go through the process hundreds and hundreds of times, spend thousands of hours before you become an expert, before you can get in on the mat or in the ring or whatever and actually, have some success with it. So some people like to do that. Some people like to kind of learn and look, if it takes you 2-3 years to learn it, fine. If you want to do that, if you want to make the mistakes and you're okay with, taking on that risk, you're 100% by yourself, go ahead and do it. But I think that's why it's important that whether it's residential or commercial, I think that's where buyers agents and strategists provide that value is they've spent thousands of hours doing it and, learning property, learning the ins and outs of property. And that's the benefit you get. You're mitigating your risk basically. Yeah.
There's a quote I'm probably going to butcher, but it's something along the lines of, I hear, I'm aware, I see, I learn, I do, I understand. Right. Yeah. So if you've never done it before, how do you understand the process?
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't mean just because you've read a few books that, I'm an expert now. It's like, okay, you've got the concept, but it's like the whole thing, the jiu-jitsu thing, you're not going to be able to take on a master. Like you just can't. It doesn't work that way.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the good things about investing is that you can actually outsource it. So unlike martial arts where you have to get in a ring and fight someone, whereas with investing, you actually outsource a lot of that to someone else. Like
you can get Mike Tyson.
yeah, you can get Mike Tyson in there for you. That's right.
Okay. So now let's move on to now when someone might be ready, because we all speak to a lot of investors, people, and sometimes people have got a million ideas.
Or maybe a simpler one, Will. Would you recommend commercial for somebody's first investment?
That's a really good question. And it's not a straightforward answer. And let me explain.
Depending on their position, right?
Depending on the position, that's right. So as I mentioned, commercial properties have a bigger risk profile than residential. So if someone, let's say, worked their butt off, for the first, 10, 15 years of their career, they've saved a bit of money, they've bought their home, and now they're ready to invest. And the next investment that they're going to do is going to basically clear all their savings. Then I will probably say, maybe commercial is not the best next investment. Maybe you should stick with residential because there's very limited downside risk. If residential becomes vacant, worst case scenario, you get a 10 in 3 or 4 weeks. In this sort of market, you probably get a 10 in a few days. Whereas with commercial properties, if the property becomes vacant for whatever reason, it could be vacant for 3, 6, 9 months, right? So if you had all your savings in that commercial property, you can get undone really, really quickly. But another scenario, let's say somebody inherited a bunch of money, okay, for whatever reason, and they're buying a commercial property, but they're not spending all their savings. They still have a buffer. They still got financial capacity to write the risk, right, the vacancy, the commercial property. If that was that individual with that circumstance, then I would say, probably commercial might be suitable for you. But it really comes down to the individual's, capacity.
Maybe an entrepreneur, right, who's been banking huge profits for years, just does not have the time to invest, but they've got, like you say, $2 million cash surplus. We're not so worried, right? Because they've clearly got a soft place to land if something goes wrong, right? Not most people we speak to, but it's cool when we do, right?
Yeah. But really, it comes down to the individual situation, right? And what it really comes down to, I always kind of think of it as two things. It's, your risk for your appetite for risk, number one, and number two is, can you take that risk? And what I mean by that is, have you got the capital and the backing and the cash and the cash flow to actually get into commercial? So, for example, sometimes we might be speaking to clients and they think they're ready for commercial, and we might look at their situation and say, hey, look, you don't really have that much equity to play with. You don't really have that much cash flow or income or excess funds. Maybe we should kind of like build out your residential portfolio first, build up that equity, and then we can look at commercial. Would that be fair to say that you've really got to be in a very stable position before you can, unless you're really willing to take those huge risks?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, yes. It comes down to the individual's risk appetite. If someone's happy to take risks because they're going for something big, and they're not afraid of maybe losing a deposit, then yeah, look, that's no problems. But generally speaking, I think most investors that we speak with are probably not in that boat. So I will probably say you definitely want a strong financial base or foundation before you jump into commercial. The other thing worth considering also is just your knowledge and your mindset as well. So I often compare commercial and residential like driving a sports car versus driving a Formula One car, right? So you're still driving a car, but one's going to get you somewhere a lot faster, but it's a lot more complicated and riskier to drive. You can crash and burn in a Formula One car.
Get a lot more skill.
And almost get killed. That's right, or get killed. So likewise, with commercial, I always find that if you've already done a few residential property deals, you've bought, a few, you've done a few transactions, you're not completely new, right? So you understand how contracts work generally, you understand how buying and selling works, you understand how financing works. So that's going to lay some foundation for you to take the next step. So not just financially, but mentally, and you also need to be, prepared before you make that jump.
Yeah, because you've got to be pretty decisive, right? I mean, like you said earlier, a lot of these deals, especially in commercial, and that's where a buyer's agent really comes in handy because you've got access to that off-market stock, and around, I think you said it was 60% was off-market. You've got to be decisive at that point, and being decisive means you've got some knowledge behind you already. You've got some experience. You don't want to be a first-time investor and going, oh, okay, let's go and acquire this $1 million, $2 million, commercial property, right? You have to be decisive in the process.
But it strikes me as well when you say that when our risk curve is naturally greater and we're only considering maybe a third to a half of what's available if we do this on our own, does it sound like such a good idea? To me, not so much. You'd want that professional help to make sure you've at least considered all the options on the table.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's like if you're getting sued, for whatever reason, you want to hire the best lawyer and best consultant and to help you. And what I find really intriguing is that using the getting sued example is when someone gets sued, you'll see a lawyer on both sides. The plaintiff and the defendant both would have a lawyer. But why is it that in residential transactions, you only see one agent representing the seller? You're dealing with multiple millions of dollars transaction, right? And for most people, it's a life savings. Like, why wouldn't you have someone representing you? Why would you only have one agent on the other side of the fence who's representing the seller, and you don't have a professional representing you on this side of the fence when you're the buyer?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, people are so used to selling agents, real estate agents. It's a norm. It's like, oh yeah, I've got to sell my home or sell a property. I get a selling agent in Egypt because they're the professional. And then when it comes to the buying side, it's kind of like people scratch their head and go, well, why would I need someone to help me buy property? I can do that myself. But when you put it that way, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre because you're paying buyer's agent, I don't know, like 1 or 2% of the transaction fee, right? Same as what you would pay a selling agent,
Yeah.
right? And the job of the selling agent is to justify their fee and try to get at least 1 or 2% higher than in terms of price than what the vendor could get on their own, and vice versa. The buyer's agent's job, on top of everything that I've just mentioned, is to have a financial gain for the buyer. So if the buyer's agent is not saving the buyer equivalent to what their fee is, then obviously you don't have the right buyer's agent. But if you have the right buyer's agent, they should be doing that for you. So even though it is a cost, but you should get that back.
Yeah. It's an investment.
Is it investment?
It's an investment.
Yes.
Yeah. And also like whether it's resi or commercial, what you're paying for is the expertise, because half the battle is actually pinpointing where you're going to buy and what you're going to buy. Let's talk a little bit about gains. Like what's the upside? We talked about, yes, there's risk, but what's the potential gains with commercial versus resi? What's the upside compared to, because resi's, we mainly deal with resi. We like to help people
talk about it till we're blue in the face.
Yeah, we like to help people build that foundation, but once they're ready and they want to delve into commercial, what are the potential upsides actually compared to residential?
Yeah, nice little name drop there too.
Yeah. It's all in the name. It's all in the name.
That's it. Well, like I said before, I mean, the upside is huge. Like it's 2 or 3 times what you get in residential. Let's look at it this way. So when you look at residential property investors, there's usually a few stages they go through. And correct me if I'm wrong, because you guys are actually doing a lot more resi deals than I am. Typically, they start off as a buy and hold investor. They'll find something that they're familiar with, they're comfortable with, within a price range. They'll buy it and hold it, and then wait for the market to do its thing. So they might, on average, get 7% annual growth out of that property. And then the next stage, someone who's a little bit more sophisticated, they'll look for some sort of value add opportunity. Maybe they'll put a granny flat at the back. Maybe they'll knock down and rebuild, or do a bit of refurbishment or renovation. And they could expect maybe like a 10%, 15%, maybe uplift in equity doing that. And then finally, they graduate and become a proper developer, right? So they either they'll do a duplex or a few townhouses, or some people do really, really well. They build multiple units, and things like that. But that's, generally speaking, that's kind of like the progression. So you kind of go from 7% per annum to maybe like a 10, 15%, and then to a proper developer maybe like 20, 25%, right? That's kind of the progression. So when you look at commercial properties, obviously you can still have the buy and hold strategies and all the type of things, but what you'll find is with commercial property leases, they always have a annual review of the rent. Sometimes it's CPI, sometimes it's fixed 3%, 4%, 5%, depending on what it is. Quite often there's a market review that's applicable to the lease if the tenant exercises their option. And that's where most of the commercial property investors make their money, is at the market review. So let's look at the last couple of years. So ever since the pandemic, we've seen industrial property prices just skyrocket. And that's a combination of different factors, obviously rise in e-commerce and all that type of stuff, which we won't get into today. But let's say you bought a factory somewhere in Australia. Let's say you paid $1 million for it. Let's say you bought it, at the back end of 2019. You could expect probably a 50 to 60% increase in rent today from when you bought it. That would directly correlate to a 50 to 60% increase in the value of the property.
Right. That's insane.
Yeah, right. And then you look at residential property. Let's say you bought something in 2019, residential property. I guess in some markets it's gone, 50, 60%. But generally speaking, probably 30-ish% maybe, right? So that's one side of things. That's probably 2x from there onwards. And then you look at sort of the value add opportunities in commercial property. The opportunities are endless. So you can, for example, very easily buy a commercial property that's undervalued. And there's a number of reasons why the property is undervalued. And one of the main reasons is because there is a lease in place that's putting pressure on the value of the property. So what I mean by that is, like I mentioned, industrial property rents has gone up 50%. Let's say there was a tenant that signed a lease in 2018. They were paying 2018 rent. And they've signed up on an incremental increase of, let's say, 4%. Fast forward 5 years, 2023.
Which is not even CPI right now.
Which is not even CPI right now. But fast forward to 2023, market rents have gone up 60%, but their rent's only gone up by 4% per annum. So they're probably paying about 40% under market rent as a result of that. So we're starting to see a lot of that happening. So a lot of our clients are starting to find these, from us, we're trying to help our clients find these type of properties where it's under rented. There's an existing tenant in place, they're paying 2018 rents, and their lease is about to expire. So we want to acquire these properties and then hit the tenant with a market review upon lease expiry and then get that 30-40% rental uplift.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you had a lease and the tenant's paying below market rent, that lease is actually making your property worth less. So it's very often we see commercial properties actually worth more vacant. That's why a lot of commercial property investors, they were trying to find ways to kick the tenant out.
Yeah.
Some do it ethically and some do it, other ways. But yeah, to answer your point, that's exactly right.
Because I think it's worth especially because for our audience may not know this, I certainly didn't know it as well before the conversation, so I've learned a lot today too. So we may well have a vendor who knows the property is worth more on the open market, but they know for anyone coming in, they simply cannot get the finance for more, right? And every valuation is going to show below what they could get if they were to sell it reasonably. So knowing that someone can't finance this could be a $2-3 million property, who's going to come up to you with bags of money, right? And if they can, they're the one buyer in the market who could do it. So then they can call their terms too.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I get asked this really often. It's like, so if there's so much upside in this property, why doesn't the owner just do it themselves? Well, the thing is, like, a lot of people have very different reasons of selling. They could be going for a divorce, or it could be a death in the family, or it could be they're retiring, or, maybe they're just trying to, rebalance their portfolio. There are so many reasons why people are selling. And, who cares? As long as the buyer's in the right place, right time, has got the capacity to take advantage of it, then great.
Well, yeah, let's imagine it, right? If you were ready to retire, pull up stumps, go overseas, and someone says, yeah, look, you can get another $500K, just wait 5 years, stuff that, give me the money now, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, spot on.
Wow, we've got so much to talk about. I don't know if we can fit it in all
Let's
in
get
one
as much
episode.
as we can, or we can do a second episode.
We'll probably have to get you on for another episode, but there's around 5-6 main strategies that you use with commercial buying. I like how you kind of like call them. You've got you did your divide and conquer and that sort of thing. But tell us about a no money down strategy. How does that work? And make it really simple, even for us, because
and I think this is where a lot of people get really attracted towards commercial as well, especially if they've read books on the subject from American authors or good old Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? The idea of a no money down deal just sounds amazing.
Yeah. It sounds the juiciest on the list. So we thought we'd just give us the basics, give us the basic rundown.
Because obviously for us in residential, it doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
So to get to learn about the unicorn deal is pretty exciting for me.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do that. I mean, you can do it in residential, but it's much harder. Yeah, it's much harder doing residential. Whereas a commercial, I wouldn't say it's very easy, but there's more opportunities to do that. Okay, so in my ebook, Allan, which obviously you've looked at, you've read, there's half a dozen strategies, and one of them is no money down strategy. And basically, what it is literally no money down to own a property. How it works is like this, and this is not a strategy for someone who has a very low risk appetite, because it's pretty high risk. I mean, just the name suggests it. But
you've got a specific example where you helped a client do a no money down. Take us through that example.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've got several examples, but the one in the ebook goes like this. So there's a freehold office building in the Metro Sydney market. And the owner, the previous owner of the building has owned it for probably 20 years or so. And he's developed a really close relationship with the existing tenants. And he's a nice guy. He doesn't want to upset the tenant. So he's never really increased the rent much. So it comes to a point where he has to sell the property. And because he's never really increased the rent, the tenants in that building are paying probably 50%, 50,
Wow.
below market rent.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And the guy didn't really care because he's owned the property for so long. It's already paid off. It's giving him good cash flow. He just didn't want the stress of, upsetting the tenant and replacing tenants. Like, he's just one of those landlords where those best landlords that you can think of. Like, he's just one of those guys. So anyway, he had to sell the building, and the building's worth $9 million, and based on the rental income. Okay. So we found this deal, introduced the buyer, and basically what we negotiated was that we'll pay you $9 million for it. However, we want a 6 months delayed settlement. And during that 6 months, we want early access to speak with the existing tenants with the objective of renegotiating new leases with the existing tenant. So there's half a dozen tenants in that building. We went back and forth a little bit in the negotiations, but eventually that's what we agreed to: is $9 million, 6 months delayed settlement, 5% deposit on exchange, and early access to sign up new leases. So as soon as the contract got exchanged, we started contacting the existing tenants because we've got permission to do so. So 5 out of the 6 were able to renegotiate the rents to market rent. So we took it from $250 per square meter, which is what they were paying, up to on average $480 per square meter.
Yeah, wow.
So the last tenant, the sixth tenant, couldn't afford it, so they decided to move out, and that's fine because we eventually replaced them anyway. So the negotiations part took about 6 weeks. So we did negotiations with 5 out of 6 tenants. We signed up new leases with all 5 of these tenants, and then all these 5 leases were at the market rent of $480 per square meter, the blended rate of $480 per square meter. We took the new leases to the bank, and we ordered a valuation based on the new leases. So based on the new leases, the valuation came in at 16.1.
I was going to say about 16, right?
Yeah, exactly. At 16.1 million. So we applied for a bank loan at, I think it was 60% LVR, which was enough to pay the vendor the $9 million they want, and the stamp duty and the purchasing costs. And so the buyer settled on a property with no money down using that tactic. And it's giving him positive cash flow.
Yeah. Now, the risk, obviously, if we don't renegotiate and we then get a 60% loan, is now due for is roughly 4 mil, right? Or 3.6.
Well, that's right. That's right. So, there are obviously risks involved. The risk are, what if the tenants say, no, we can't negotiate a new lease, or we can't sign the leases in time for settlement.
Yep.
And, there's a bunch of other risks involved. But thankfully, we had a pretty good run with the tenants. They're all pretty reasonable. And I think also the goodwill that was built by the previous owner as well. So that was advantageous for us. But you're right. I mean, there are risks involved. And, if you don't have the risk appetite to take that risk, then it's probably not a deal for you.
Yes. But when we're that far below market value, and if you're well enough established as a person, then you can say, okay, I can eat that. Suddenly now there's a huge profit that's there in a short space of time.
Exactly. Imagine it's like you bought something for $9 million and you turn it into $16.1 million in a matter of 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's purely a bank value as well. That's not assuming he doesn't put it on market.
And just to clarify, like that's not all commercial deals. We're talking that's the top end of risk there on commercial deals, like one of the top end.
That is definitely one of the top ends in terms of risks.
They're in the range of commercial property deals, you've also got a range of 1, 2, 3 in terms of risk.
Yep.
That's definitely at the top end. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Have you any more questions, man? Before we?
No, I think that was really good. That was a great example. So I've learned a lot from this. So it was just a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Man. Look, we just we just don't have time to keep. There's so much we could ask.
We could pick your brain. There's another 4 strategies that you talk about in depth and detail. So, look, man, extremely fun episode. I think we ought to get you back for some more and have a bit more fun.
Yeah.
100%.
Before we go, Will, if somebody's kind of thinking about commercial, maybe give us like 3, I don't know, a few do's and don'ts of commercial before we go.
Okay, do's and don'ts. Well, the don'ts are don't go for strata commercial properties because it's very difficult to value add on strata. It's like buying an apartment versus buying a house. Yeah, same sort of logic. Number 2 is don't fall in love with the deal. Okay, be prepared to walk away from the deal because the person who's prepared to walk away from the deal has more power in the negotiations. Another don't is don't put all your life savings into one commercial property deal for the reasons already stated. The do's are must do your due diligence thoroughly. There's a lot of hidden, issues with commercial properties that if you're not thorough, you won't dig up.
Just touching on that, I actually had that. I wanted to ask you that the importance of feasibility studies. Maybe if you can just quickly cover that, the importance of doing a feasibility study, especially on commercial. We still do the same for resi, but tell us about it for commercial.
Yeah, because commercial is so much riskier, you want to do your due diligence into feasibility properly. One of the advantages of commercial properties is very predictable in terms of the outcome, okay? Because you're not so reliant all the time on the market conditions. So with residential, if you buy in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to wait a long time before you get the capital gains. Whereas commercial is a lot more predictable. So the feasibility is a lot more predictable as well. So if you're buying into any type of investment with blindfolds on, you're going to make mistakes and you're probably going to lose money. And because the risk with commercial property is so much greater than residential, your potential loss is going to be much greater. So the feasibility is you have to be really thorough. You're going to make sure you've done the right market research, you've done the right comparables. Don't be afraid to look at 100 deals before you put in your first offer. What we do at Property Lions, we literally analyze over 100 properties a week on behalf of our clients. And then we only end up picking maybe 2 or 3 that we think has some legs. So if it's your first time doing commercial, don't be afraid to look at 100, 200, 300 properties before actually make a decision on what to buy. And make sure you have a good lawyer that understands commercial leasing. And most importantly, make sure you have a good commercial property broker. There are so many finance brokers out there that are really good at resi, but doesn't understand commercial.
I thought you were going to drop another F-bomb there for a moment.
Yeah, I was just refraining myself.
You're allowed to on this one.
We'll just beep it later. Yeah.
But yeah, look, make sure you're speaking to commercial property guys, commercial property finance guys, commercial property lawyers, commercial property managers. It's just, it's a specialized thing.
It's a different language.
It's a different language. That's right.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Will, for coming on to Property Soup. We definitely need to get you back on the show again. We just didn't have time to cover everything today. But, man, we could just keep going for hours and like you said, keep picking your brain. And
we've had fun, man. I've learned a lot. I'm sure that the audience has learned a lot too. So, really looking forward to getting you back in the future.
Yeah, sounds good. Love to come back in.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. See you guys.